Playoff rankings released. What is the takeaway? What are the takeaways here? Well, first, let's just recap it quickly, because I have hand-drawn on the back of this piece of paper the 1 through 25. They spent an inordinate amount of time on 25 to 21. God bless Utah and UTSA. But what were we doing? So having said that, as the vacuum cleaner cranks up outside, let's talk about the top of this thing. And I got several takeaways. I don't think this is being sold as a very, very combustible show. I don't think that these are combustible rankings. There wasn't really a shocker. But I got some things I want to talk about. So the top 10, just to run it down in case you're listening on podcast tomorrow morning: Georgia, Bama, Oregon, Ohio State. Cincy is still at number 5, which I was mildly surprised by, but, mildly and mildly alone. Michigan, Michigan State, Notre Dame, Oklahoma State, just asterisks the Cowboys for now, and Wake Forest at number 10. So the first thing, when I was watching this with producer Jesse and director Colin, they were sitting right there, I said, man, we got to talk about Michigan, Michigan State, because that's where a lot of people's attention has been. Now, it's not that I expected Michigan State to jump Michigan. I am telling you what's aggravating me more and more about the entire conversation surrounding this is the phrase, it'll work itself out. Yes, it will work itself out in this particular case. But for about 3 weeks now, I have had a growing level of aggravation about the phrase, oh, it'll work itself out. Hey, Michigan State, Michigan this year, yeah, it will work itself out. So you can look at me with good conscience and you can tell me, well, it doesn't matter, it's semantics, one over the other. It doesn't matter if one beat the other. Head to head, it matters, but it's really irrelevant because don't worry, it'll work itself out. Well, it does matter. It matters a whole lot. It just may not matter this particular year, but keep in mind, we're not 100 years into this process. We're about 7 years into the process. And so every year we get further into this, you're doing two things. Number one, you're defining your principles, and you are setting precedent. Those things are still mightily important right now in this whole process. So you want to know why someone like me may get a little bent out of shape when you have comparable teams and a head-to-head result is not appreciated or respected enough. It's not because of this year. Of course this is going to work itself out. Of course where Michigan and Michigan State are is a moot point at the moment because of the games that they still have to play. But what happens if we apply the same logic that's being followed right now in 2023, when there are two teams that have played each other, but they don't exactly have a murderer's row left in front of them, and you've just decided one of them's better than the other one, regardless of what you've actually seen play out on the field? What if we don't, in other words, have a path or a scenario where it'll just work itself out? If it'll work itself out then how about giving me what it should be now? And if you're just telling me that, oh, Michigan should be ahead of Michigan State, well, tell me that, okay? And then don't tell me afterwards it'll work itself out. And then we can go down a different road and we could argue different criteria. But I tell you, like, the more I listen to that, the more it kind of rubs me the wrong way. Not because I'm trying to manufacture some outrage here. I don't care really about talking about this, to be honest with you. We got much better things to do on the show tonight. But I'm not doing what a lot of other people out there are doing. A lot of other people are faking this stuff for clicks. I don't really care if you click on this or not. I'm telling you, this won't matter this year. But using similar logic could matter down the road. So that's what has me a little bit out of shape about where Michigan State is in relation to Michigan. We will see the Spartans Saturday where they will have an opportunity to jump Michigan. That doesn't derail the point I just made. It actually validates the point I just made. All right, so this whole Big Ten bumper car scenario that we talked about at length last week is still in play. One part of that, though, is no longer an option. See, Penn State over Michigan could have really thrown a wrench into all this, but now we don't have that as a possibility because Michigan went and beat Penn State. But the Big Ten bumper car scenario, to be clear, is what would have to happen for no Big Ten team to make the playoff. There's been a lot of talk, various points in the year. Will it be one Big Ten team or two Big Ten teams? Well, we prefer disaster around here. At least we prefer to present the route of potential disaster. And it has been there, and it is still there. It's very unlikely, but it's still there. Here's, by the way we figure it, what would have to happen. You would need Michigan State to probably beat Penn State or beat Ohio State Saturday. It's not required, but it would probably give you easily the best path to the bumper car scenario. Then you'd need Ohio State to beat Michigan at the end of the year. And you would, in the meantime, need Penn State to go into East Lansing and beat Michigan State, which would send, by our count, a two-loss team to Indianapolis to face, let's just say, Wisconsin. That's one path. There is another path, though, that is growing, I would say, more and more likely by the week as Wisconsin gets things figured out. And that is this. It could be that Ohio State wins the rest of their games. It could be that Michigan wins the rest of their games. It could be that Michigan State wins the rest of their games, and a one-loss team from that division goes to the Big Ten title game, and they get knocked out by Wisconsin. And then you do not have a Big Ten team in the playoff. I think it's unlikely, but it's not impossible. So that's something that I'm watching very closely, not just because of what it would do to the Big Ten, but all of a sudden it throws a whole new level of chaos potentially in this thing. For instance, if you're Notre Dame, which I'm going to talk about later, if you're Cincinnati, if you have that thing where Alabama wins against Arkansas, wins against Auburn, and loses close against Georgia, there are these two camps out there, and there's one hardcore, oh, Bama will still be in if they lose close. And then there's this other camp, no way Bama's in. Neither of you are right. It depends on what else happens out there. That's what will determine whether a two-loss Alabama were to make it in or not. That's why I haven't really gone down that path. But let's talk about that since we haven't gone down that path. This whole Georgia-Alabama, I don't think a two-loss Alabama is going to be in outside of, the bumper car scenarios happening. But I will ask this. I'm very curious how that committee is going to handle it if Alabama does end up winning the remainder of their regular season games and they go to Atlanta, and you cannot even begin to imagine the pressure cooker that game will be if it does happen, Georgia-Bama. If they go to Atlanta and Alabama beats Georgia narrowly, or I don't care, they beat them by 3 touchdowns, it's not a question of whether Georgia's still going to be in. Oh, Georgia'd be in. What I want to know is where are they dropping them? They dropping them all the way to 4, where it's presumably a rematch in the semifinal? Or are they dropping them to 2 or 3, where the earliest you could have a rematch would be the national championship game? I have not gotten an answer on this. Either way, that I think makes a ton of sense. There are people out there who are adamant that, well, if they had a rematch or a threat of a rematch, they'd want it to be in the semifinal so they could avoid the rematch in the title game, and therefore they could also avoid an all-SEC title game. And then there's this other camp that says, no. They're not going to have Georgia-Bama play an SEC championship game and then play again immediately. And to both of those, I'm like, why? Where's that written? How do you know that? No one knows. That's the point. It's still new. Even though we're 7 years in, we're still going through several different scenarios for the first time. If this were the AP poll, we would have decades of case study. We would have decades of predictable behavior modeling that we could use to foresee how a voter in Des Moines, Iowa would handle such things. I don't know how the AD at Rutgers or the associate AD of Utah, whoever's on this committee, I don't know how they're going to handle that. And the last thing I want to do is I want to look off in the distance. There it is. There's the shark fin. And it's got a big N and it's got a big D on it. Notre Dame's still out there. Jesse, where were they at? Notre Dame was 8th. They were 8th in the rankings tonight. So Notre Dame just kind of swimming around. It's a little proverbial shark fin out there. It's way offshore right now. You're not really worried about it. Maybe you should be worried about it because their toughest remaining hurdle was last week, and they really stuffed Virginia. How does Notre Dame get in this thing? Well, I heard a lot of conversation about this on the show where they were revealing the rankings, and best I could tell, the conclusion that was arrived at is Notre Dame can't get in this. Why, you may ask? Because Cincinnati's in the way, and the committee's going to honor head-to-head. Well, there are 2 potential issues with that, friends. Number one, no one told you Cincinnati's going to be undefeated. You just assume it. And secondly, even if Cincinnati is undefeated, there's this other thing, or maybe things that could happen, that again will greatly determine how high Notre Dame can climb. For instance, what if Oregon loses this Saturday, or what if Oregon loses in the Pac-12 championship game? What if the Big Ten bumper car scenario were to happen? Do you quickly see how that, along with Georgia knocking Bama out, do you quickly see how that maybe, along with Cincinnati losing a game, or any combination of those things, do you quickly see how there isn't all that much that stands in the way between Notre Dame and a potential 4 seed in that playoff? I hear your teeth grinding even as I say that. And I know what you're thinking. And you know, because we've had it out on this show before, that I've disagreed with you in the past on Notre Dame. I think they deserved it when they've been in. You don't. That's fine. We're not relitigating that. But I am telling you, Notre Dame's not quite as out of this thing as many believe, only because they've convinced themselves already Cincinnati's going to be undefeated. That's not a given. It's just a likelihood. It's not a given. Cincinnati has not been playing elite level football. they've been playing get me to the next week football. And so they've got SMU. They've probably got Houston, I think, in the conference championship game. They could lose. They could still lose. And at that point, your head-to-head, it really doesn't matter because the strength of schedule is going to be greatly tilted towards Notre Dame, and they would jump Cincinnati. So I'm just telling you, there's still a lot, even though there's only 2 regular season weeks left. November's still really long, guys. These last 2 weeks in that conference championship weekend, still a lot that can happen.